The scent of candle wax was gently departing the darkening room. Upon its last farewell, Ralas Relvi slowly got up from his recliner to shut the window of his bedchambers. Once a stately young nobleman of House Indoril, now merely reduced to a vestige of his former renown, Relvi took a contemptuous look in the mirror beside his bed. Never would he have thought that the pedestal he once adorned would crumble at his feet like this, not by the might of fire and sword in the ague of battles he had fought, but creeping in the shadows of his own mind. A prison cell of his own design, he thought, locked up, with the key just barely out of reach. A gentle knock on his chamber door interrupted the misery of his quiet solitude. It was Mera Obralor, his housemaid. "You look positively sickly, Sarah," Mera smirked, in a futile attempt at cheering up her master. "Dear Mera," said Ralas, as he sat on his creaking double bed, "I would rather be positively dead." "It's time for your medicine, Sarah," said Mera, to dispel the awkward silence conjured by Relvi's grim shot at humour. At least what she hoped was that, if not out of obligation to her master. "Remember? Once after every meal and before bed." "Yes, I remember," sighed Relvi. It has been 3 months and a little over a week since the death of his beloved wife, Mistress Brelina Relvi. Her stunning visage invaded Ralas' mind whenever his eyes came shut, even if for fleeting blinks in daytime lucidity. Yet the oddly comforting thought of her ephemeral presence would turn haunting, driving Relvi to delirium. A former military general, Relvi already made friends with death, whom he cheated every time but witnessed firsthand in the heat of battle. Yet the triumphs on the battlefield intoxicated him, and Brelina's tragedy could not snap the general back into sobriety. So familiar with his friend, and so unable to accept their company. For days on end, Ralas would muse on the time he spent with his beloved, the time he wished he could have spent in her embrace when he was out fighting, and the time he now dreaded to spend without her. In brief episodes of returning strength, he would partake in his mundane household activities and hobbies he no longer truly found enjoyment in, picturing his love beside him, sharing every moment together. He almost tricked Mera into thinking he was on the path to recovery, albeit suspiciously fast, until he would return to his pitiable bedridden state. He would resume the sleepless musing, vivid would-be memories of romantic joy flowing with every colour of life. To his maid, who was denied the privilege of these depressed yet comforting fantasies, it was but simply staring at the bedroom ceiling, devoid of any outside emotions. Sometimes, Ralas would lock himself in his study, diving into the vast library the Relvi family had amassed throughout the years, seeking freedom from his torment, or perhaps answers to whatever questions he might have had, or perhaps simply desperate for asylum from his sorry state. Walking the streets of Necrom overwhelmed him. The irony of living in the city of the dead but never truly making peace with the fact that death comes for us all, he thought. Whether I would have liked it or not, you would still be taken from me, my dear Brelina. Sooner or later. He picked up the next dusty tome off his shelf, squinting. But I cannot accept that I have to let you go. Betray our love like this. It is a thought I cannot bear. Not a day went by where the general did not wish to trade places with his beloved, yet at the same time he dreaded to think about Brelina sharing his horrible fate, of seemingly unending grief. Days went by, melded together in an odious palette of greys. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, yet the pain would not subside. Ralas carefully wiped the dust off the tome, revealing its macabre cover of a shapeless creature, followed by an empty title page. Where and when, in Vex's name, he could have procured this unholy book, he did not know. Curiosity got the better of him, and he sifted through its pages, somewhat hastily, as if eager to cast it away as soon as he was done feeding his nosiness. Inside were dozens of fell rituals. The very presence of this book must be insulting to someone of his stature, he thought. Yet it felt like every word of the foul tome was whispering Brelina's name. Every incantation, a confession of undying love. Every flip of the page, a wifely brush against his scarred cheek. Is our love not strong enough for me to have you back? Rallis closed his eyes, trying to resist the temptation of dark magic well beyond his grasp. The whispers faded, but the temptation stayed. And that was when he knew that Brelina Relvi must live, no matter what the cost. He opened the title page again. Letters danced around the corners of his eyes until they swirled into unintelligible words, and then into unintelligible name. Master Soris Allah. On a crisp summer day, 15th of sun's height, of a year Rallis Relvi could no longer remember for reasons curious, the general was enjoying a midday stroll with his trusted soldiers. The mild inebriation of a mission well done was clearly visible on their faces, easily readable on their unusually whimsical demeanour. Necrom was only a day's ride away, and though aching to return home to the roaring praise of its townsfolk and the flin and nightly wenching, the general and his men decided to camp for the night. After dinner, the general sorted through the bags on his guar and took out an assortment of rather mundane curios he had taken as battle trophies. Nothing particularly grand or worthy of keeping, yet somehow all of the items he took were brimming with enchanting mystique. Among them was an intricate rubidite necklace. The exotic trinket compelled Rallis to examination under the playful glint of the dying campfire. He ran his fingers across the crimson pendant, with a vaguely wistful look at the horizon, as if likening himself to an ancient blind seer, interpreting the carving by means of divination. When his gaze fell upon the amulet once more, he saw a scarab crest. The reavers they skirmished with earlier that day turned out to be cultists of the accursed house Dagoth. He smiled at the thought of besting them, feigning mockery of the dwindled might of the sixth house. In reality, it was an attempt at warding off an unexpected anxiety spike. His gaze remained locked on the pendant, summoning the whispers entrapped within it. He hastily tucked it into his pocket and went to sleep. The following day, the joyous arrival home held no festivities for General Rallis, for it was stained by grim news of his wife's passing. "What was the Nix's name again?" Relvi hissed as he downed his medicine. "Soris Allah, Siryo," said Mayra. "I know that name. A Telvanni mage." "Telvanni? How typical of these blasphemous fools to pen filthy tomes such as this." "Siryo, I understand he is a master of conjuration, and some say he openly offers necromantic services for a certain price." "I shall not have my beloved raised as a filthy zombie!" Rallis clawed at the edge of his desk, leaving beastly marks with his untrimmed fingernails. To do so would be to taint her memory in the worst of ways. His voice quivered, and he no longer felt himself a vessel of aberrant anger. "I cannot." "Siryo, do not speak of it." "But, Siryo," Mayra gulped, "rumor has it the sorcerer is a genuine miracle maker. They claim he can bring the dead back to life, as if they never died in the first place." "Drivel." "Siryo." "Nonsense. I do not wish to hear any more of this, if you dare." "Have you not heard of Drain Salvora and the miracle of Ashamel?" Rallis Relvi raised his brow in silence. Taken aback by her master's quizzical stare, Mayra continued. Drain Salvora is a famous alchemist at the settlement of Ashamel, northwest of Lothanis, the port town on the Telvanni coast. I think so. In any case, it was not his potions that made his name. The alchemist was more famous for the mysterious circumstances of his untimely death, and wondrous return to life, full of youthful vigour no less, despite his age, attributed to be the work of the sorcerer Soris Allah. Wonderful bedtime story, my dear Mayra, Relvi snarled, though in jest, a rather brute quirk typical of a general in midlife crisis. However, I don't reckon it's bedtime yet. Is it? Seryo, this is a true story. Drain Salvora remains alive to this very day. Though I don't quite remember when he was brought back. 500 years ago? Last week? In the First Era? Mayra! No, I swear it happened yesterday. Mayra scratched the back of her head, akin to a guilty toddler. Or some months earlier, I think. It is pretty fresh news, I mean... Mayra! Seryo, this may be our chance at bringing back Mistress Brelina. You will believe it when you see it for yourself. Should we not ride for Ashamel? And risk wasting our time, or worse, humiliation for asking around if a long-dead alchemist is still in business? They'll think poor old Rallis has lost his mind completely. Mayra sat down beside her master. In her eyes, Relvi saw a mix of hope and newly acquired confidence. A thought kept playing back in his mind, though with a voice he scarcely recognized as his own. With my dear Brelina gone, is there truly anything left to risk? Very well, said Rallis, taking a deep breath. We ride to Ashamel at the first light. See if this Drain Salvora is the real deal. Rallis woke up on his recliner the following morning. He hadn't gone to bed, and drifted out of consciousness in the middle of an imaginary conversation with Brelina. He was still aslumber in the morning when Mayra came in to leave his medicine on the end table and give him a blanket to shield him from the frigid sun's dusk wind. Soris Allah's twisted tome was sitting on the bed, breathing, watching, almost whispering sweet nothings in Brelina's seductive voice. Every other night, when Rallis had strength enough to get in bed without departing the waking world right where he was, he would hold the book tight in his arms, hidden under the covers. Its hums would synchronize with his slowing heartbeat as it lay snug against his chest. Sternly greeted by morning clarity, Rallis would cast the book away to the darkest corner of his bedchambers. Yet every night he found himself within earshot of its honeyed whispers. The Guars attacked up, Sirrah, said Mayra softly, as not to plunge Relvi out of waking languor. She continued when she saw her master nod. We might need to stop at the market to pick up some food before we head for Lothanis. The trip to the port town of Lothanis was not particularly eventful or dangerous. Had it not been for Relvi's preference for more palatial accommodations and tastier food, they would have kept riding all the way to Ashamel. Their inquiries about the returned alchemist evoked hushed tones from the townsfolk, as if they were speaking of a curse rather than a miracle of life. Mayra O'Braylor was quick to dismiss the superstition, seemingly more aroused by the prospect of Brelina's resurrection than her suspicious husband. Nevertheless, much to Mayra's joy, the rumours were true. Drain Salvora, the fabled alchemist, was indeed real and very much alive. When his visitors approached Ashamel's edge, they were greeted by a rather grumpy middle-aged woman, already aware of their visitor's destination. Salvora's mystical return rendered his hovel a tourist attraction, though this particular Sundas wasn't loaded with visits from the alchemist's admirers and hoax-busters. The woman's annoyance remained intact. "Looking for my brother, eh?" the woman wheezed with audible disdain. "Jala Salvora is the name." She paused, squinting at Relvi. "Not like you care. Old Codger's in his apothecary, opposite the well, Knock on the door as hard as you can." The twosome rode towards the dilapidating shop. Rallis took a moment to look at the sign that read, "Selvora's Solvents." Etched just below was a boastful motto, "Salves and potions to bring the dead back in motion." "Let's hope he doesn't drop dead when I knock the saints out of this door," said the Indoril as he dismounted. When he landed his first knock, the door came ajar with a whistling creak, as if the place had been vacant for some time. As Rallis and Mayra entered the foyer, laden with elixirs and lit like a midsummer festival, a gentle yet oddly commanding echo welcomed them from upstairs. "Come in, come in." Drain Selvora gestured to his guests as he went down the polished oaken staircase. "May I interest you in a concoction? You bring me the gold, I bring you anything your heart desires, brewed with utmost care in bottled form." The Indoril scoffed. "We're here to see the so-called miracle of Ashimal. I believe you're familiar." "Ah." A hesitant smirk adorned the alchemist's wrinkly face. "But of course, I, Drain Selvora, am the miracle of Ashimal indeed. One of the many, many feathers in my cap. I suspect you want to know how I cheated death." "Go on." The pompous alchemist continued. "A potion maker of my renown is sure to harbour many enemies. Of that, my dear friends, you can be most certain. While I have penned recipes of arcane hexproofing, my demise came from a weapon of my very own making." Selvora gasped, as if motioning his unimpressed audience to do the same. "A twisted poison of none other than jarrin root, a touch of blisterwort, and a most fell ingredient. Human flesh. Enough to take down an adult silt strider. The decoction seasoned my evening meal. Served cold by a crazed remora. A vile... Vic, shut up!" interrupted Rallis. "You can't be fetching serious. Sir, please." Mayra tugged at his shirt, still hopeful that the braggart's story might contain what they come to hear, if not a touch enthralled by its outlandishness. "How in oblivion do you even pronounce shh? Silence, my friend," replied the alchemist, his initial hesitancy redecorated into confidence by Mayra's interest in his tale. "So, he continued, though one could not tell if Selvora was actually clearing his throat. "He was a vile servant of Molag Bal, ever so anxious to trap my soul and make me chief toxicologist of his realm. Thusly I collapsed, but not before I could drink but a drop of my antidote. Yes, the very solvent capable of reverting jarrin root's lethal effects." Relvi gripped the hilt of his ebony dagger. Mayra, cautious, gave him a gentle caress on the shoulder in an attempt to stall the forthcoming disaster. "I lay lifeless for 30 days before I... Selvora continued, trembling. "Before I awoke, in perfect health. And this, my dear friends, is the miracle." Relvi pushed his maid aside, drawing his dagger as its flat side kissed the alchemist's cheek with surgical precision, just enough to scare him into submission. "You feed me any more of this guardung, and I will make sure you do not come back to life a second time," Rallis barked. "Soris Allah. Sound familiar?" I'm not sure what you're talking about. Soris Allah." Relvi's stare pierced through the alchemist, and seemed colder to him than the metal pressing against his cheek. "He was the one who brought you back." "Sarah, speak!" That name. Yes, you're right. He did it. The night I was poisoned by my cousin, my spirit stayed somehow, anchored to this world by anger, disgust, contempt. What did he do? Speak! I was drawn to his tower, countless other spirits around me wailing for help. It was agonizing. I tormented the sorcerer for weeks until he finally gave in and fulfilled my request. Bound me back to my body by way of Daedric incantations. I would rather die than hear again. Of course, a price was to be paid. He demanded monetary compensation, so I robbed my sister Jala of every last drake to repay him for his kindness. His tower. Where is it? Azura's coast, Serral. On Vardenfell, near Sadrith Mora. Tel Allah, it's called. The Indoril threw Selvora to the ground, and the pair left in haste, denying him a farewell. To Rallis, his last words began to assume Brelina's soft voice, comforting, yet full of mockery he felt undeserving of, and thus no longer willing to hear. He turned to Mayra as they were riding back to Lothanis. Did he say Drake? The housemaid asked, perplexed. Drain Selvora limped back upstairs to his study, and took a look in the mirror. The evening shadows crept through the window into the room, devouring everything on their way to embrace the alchemist. His visage turned ghastly and pale as he reached to scratch his arm, letting out a haunting sigh akin to a wraith. The skin of his arm peeled off, revealing dirty blood. The price of an entirely different kind. Dragging their shoddy boat out into the restless sea, the Indoril general and his housemaid exchanged glances for a brief moment. The former didn't seem at all like himself, ever since he'd embarked on the quest to find the miracle sorcerer. And now that communion with his wife's savior dawned ever so swiftly, Rallis Relvi no longer held a tight grip on his good sense. Each time the oars slapped the water's surface, the resulting splashes sung Brelina's name. The tome sat on Relvi's lap, as its new owner caressed its black leather cover whenever he could afford to free his hand. He ran his fingers across it as if it was his own wife receiving the otherwise disturbing bid for affection. Afraid to apply a shred of pressure on the shapeless creature adorning the cover, despite the restless rocking of the boat, the scene Rallis was unfolding before Mayra's eyes resembled some sort of balmy rehearsal before Brelina's jubilant return home. Are you all right, Seryo? Stuttered Mayra. The Indoril sat motionless, gazing upon the fading horizon without blinking. The boat was beginning to lose its momentum and came to a full stop before Rallis recovered his vigilance and the tome's seduction subsided. How long until Tel Allah? Casting a slender shadow upon the surface of the calming sea, the sorcerer's tower loomed over the boat, yet it remained hundreds of paces away. Radiant Massa danced with shy Secunda, cowering behind her companion as they embellished the night sky. The moon's playful glint prompted Rallis to imagine them a couple, eager to profess their love for each other to the whole world, but only when that world was fast asleep and unable to judge their passion. The general no longer ruminated on whether his outrageous quest to preserve his love was worthy of the judgment of his peers, for the book would whisper, "Between you and your beloved, nothing dares exist any longer." Yet, in the empty expanse of the sea, all that existed in his immediate vicinity, aside from imposing Tel Allah, was Mayra, puzzled. "Seryo, why couldn't we have hired a ferryman back in Helnim?" "Oh," Rallis paused, licking his teeth in pondering, as if coming up with an excuse on the fly. "I wanted to go straight to Tel Allah instead of Sadrith Mora." "Maybe if we had paid him a handsomer sum, Seryo?" "Even then, Mayra, no one goes directly to the tower. They dread speaking of it, let alone coming anywhere close." "Sarah," Mayra furrowed her brow, "I simply believe it's an unnecessary step in our already daunting trip. We should have stopped at Sadrith for the last time, Mayra O'Brailor." Rallis nearly gritted his teeth before he realized the gravity of his vexed remark. He sighed. I'm sorry. I just wish to do this my way. You've heard what they told us in Helmim. Only the fools and the desperate choose to seek help from Tel Alar. Right, and I do not want to be seen as either. Master Soris appears to have a rather stirring reputation, even among the Telvanni themselves. Seryo, may I ask you something? Sure, my dear. Ask away. Rallis' voice assumed its natural, gentle tone, reminiscent of the days before the tragedy skewed his mind. After Mistress Relvi was found, Mayra gulped, cautious as not to rip the scab off the wound. The murderer called her a traitor. The housemaid stopped dead in her tracks, almost flinching before her master's imminent rage. To her surprise, Relvi remained composed. "Let me catch my breath," said Rallis, his voice trembling. He was holding back tears with all his might, pretending to shield himself from the censorious gaze of his soldiers, and not the gentle housemaid, who was blessed with a power the former could never hope to harness. Compassion. She already knew Rallis cried when he thought he was alone, and never thought any less of him. In fact, her admiration for Relvi would multiply tenfold. Lamenting his waning mental strength as much as the heavy burden of his loss, the Indoril continued. In truth, I do not know why they called her that. I wish I knew, but my dearest Brelina, she never betrayed. She would never, Easy, easy. Mayra wiped his tears with her skirt. It's all right. Let it all out. Vardenfell graced the skyline before them as the sea mist dispersed. Rallis stopped rowing some minutes ago, again, and the boat was at the mercy of the rather clement current. Eat, Mayra gestured at the carefully wrapped pouch in her hand. Inside was a scrib jelly sandwich, Relvi's favourite comfort snack. He gorged on it with the ferocity of a nixhound. Never would I have thought there was anything that could hurt worse than battle wounds, he whispered, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability. That's okay. Under the shadow of Tel Alar, Rallis felt a modicum of comfort. Far darker secrets must have been uttered in this place, he thought, though maybe far less embarrassing, at least to a seasoned warrior like himself. They left the boat on the sandy shore some feet away from the tower's gates, heedful of its potential dangers. Silence befell the intruders, as if an ancient temple had been unearthed before them. However, this place commanded reverence of the opposite kind. The lair of a necromancer, who would sooner make living corpses of themselves than to aid their foolhardy cause, they thought. As they finally mustered the will to approach the gates, they were greeted by a spirit, one of many, but the only one bound to be visible by the naked eye. "Halt!" the spirit howled. "State your business, intruders." Lovely, thought Rallis. We're here to see Master Soris Alar, the necromancer. We've, heard he provides such services to the public. Lord said. The spirit passed through the gates unscathed to enact playful mockery within arm's reach. Public service necromancy. He paused. Yes, I suppose he does. You will notify him of our arrival, then? The spirit hovered still, then vanished. The heavy gates of Tel Alar opened before the visitors, aided by none save for an invisible force, as if they assumed a mind of their own. Rallis and Mayra walked up the stone staircase, guarded by sleepless skeletons towards the tower's entrance. Its interior boasted torchbug swarms above their heads, dancing in hues of red and purple and blue, glistening golden busts. Rugs of finest wool kissed their wary steps as azure candles whimpered at their approach. No stench of death or dark magic permeated the air. Instead, they were caressed by a faint scent of dusk mushrooms. "I presume you have an appointment with Magister Soris." A crackling voice came from behind the visitors as they were approached by Reuben Relith, the wizard's mouth. "Take a seat by the harvester bust. My lord will be with you shortly." Rallis was finally permitted to enter the Magister's office after the most agonizing 30 minutes of his life. He stepped on an azure dais laden with Daedric runes. Before he could decipher the text within, he felt a force pull him up through countless dozens of dark fungal mazes and floating libraries, before he finally ascended to the top of the tower, greeted by none other than the visage he desired and dreaded to see. The Telvanni Wizard Lord himself. Soris Allah sprawled on the fungal throne in his office. Around and above him were floating books of different genres. Much to Rallis' surprise, none of them seemed to match the eldritch aura of the tome of the wizard's own making. With a flick of a wrist, Soris was sifting through his library of contemporary and historical fiction, fairy tales, and academic research. This was no corpse-loving fiend in hideous linens before the Indoril. The sorcerer's whimsical posture and purple silk robes, their opulence dancing in the glint of the salt lamps, matched the enchanting surroundings of his spacious office. Relvi was almost repulsed by the sight of the sumptuous mage, half expecting to possess the satisfaction of looking down on a filthy, wretched Deathweaver. Having been denied his usual entitlement to scorn of those he deemed lesser, Relvi soon came to realize that, given his recent undoing, he was never in a position to do so in the first place, that he might be on the business end of his favored weapon, and he did not enjoy a single moment of it. "Master Soris Allah!" he belched, with a tone most unusual for a general of his stature. Before he could recoil from the oddity of his tone and continue his introduction, the mage released his gaze from the books and turned it towards his visitor, compelling Relvi to pause. Soris's eyes had an unnatural depth to them, and a tinge of what seemed to be perpetual hunger for something Relvi could not provide. Black marks tainted the corners of his eyes. Rallis could not look at them for long, and instead tried to focus on his nose and cowl, faking eye contact. "Magister. Excuse me?" "You've been excused." The wizard raised his eyebrow and took his gaze off the general, as if having lost interest. Before Rallis could feel a wave of unexplainable relief consume him, Soris followed up, noticing his visitor's somewhat pitiful confusion and appearing judgmental of his feeble conversational skills. "It's Magister Soris Allah." "Oh, it has been..." The general gulped. "It has been brought to my attention that you provide resurrection services." "Well, then you seem very attentive, what can I say? To whom do I owe the pleasure?" Soris replied. Before he could hear an answer, he noticed his visitor's badge, a crest of wings belonging to none other than House Indoril. His eyes widened slightly, assuming a childish veil of mockery Rallis did not expect from a stately sorcerer and, most importantly, could not stand. You're in Indoril? Here? In my tower?" The wizard was mere moments away from laughing. "Asking for resurrection services." Rallis most certainly did not revel in being bullied, particularly in a situation so humiliating he might as well be on his knees, an insult most other generals would rather die than even think of. The fog of grief dispersed momentarily, allowing Relvi to issue a retort. "Yes, I'm in Indoril. Is there a problem with that?" "Coming to report me to the temple?" Soris giggled. I'm here to implore your services. I happen to be in possession of a tome penned by you. It's..." "What tome?" Rallis twiddled with his bag. The book was gone. Did you take it? Give it back to me!" Soris raised his brows with a hint of genuine confusion and a subtle but great annoyance. I've never written any tomes. Yet. Now would you be so kind as to actually employ my services? The wizard flicked his forearm, and a chair slid out from under his grand table, inviting Relvi to its cushion. Widower? How did you know? No one else comes in asking for such a service. Soris got up from his throne, his svelte figure towering over Rallis. The wizard was unusually tall for a dark elf, and sported features that did not quite seem Dunmerry upon closer inspection. In any other circumstances, he could easily be described as gaunt, but what the sorcerer lacked in physique, he made up for in commanding presence. He took a scroll and handed it to Relvi. It was a contract. Soris gracefully walked to the center of his office, his back against his client. Read the scroll carefully, fill out your name, the name of the deceased, the time, date, and cause of their death, and leave your signet ring stamp at the bottom along with your signature. The deceased must not have died of natural causes and must not be older than 700 years. By reading and signing this contract, you fully agree to fulfill your part of the bargain and acknowledge that you may and will regret this transaction, regardless of the outcome's success. Pardon? Regret? Precisely, the necromancer replied. You will regret it. The general hesitated, clumsily dropping ink blots on the parchment. The hefty sum of 5 million gold pieces outlined in the contract was giving him pause, but did not seem to entirely repel him. The tome was mysteriously gone, but the whispers remained strong as ever, ridiculing him for his hesitation in Brelina's soft voice. How can you stop now? Is it not true love? I will regret nothing, he snarled, enclasped by the allure of his creeping lunacy. They all do. No! It cannot be! Rallis held his lifeless wife, his face tucked into her chest, in what resembled a death grip more so than a loving embrace. Brelina! It cannot be! A sinuous trail of blood from her mortal wound led towards the living room wall, spelling a curse Rallis could not bear to look at for a single moment. Traitor! He tugged at the necklace under his mail, Brelina's wedding dowry and a symbol of their undying love. He has always felt entranced by her charm, and always felt that none could match her beauty. But ever since the wedding day, his effusive affection bordered on obsession. First, he joked on Brelina being blessed with Almalexia's beauty, and then he likened her to the goddess herself. He never truly understood why, but it never bothered him, for he took great pleasure in being madly in love with her. And now his Almalexia was slumped on the floor, and his anger and grief were truly reminiscent of divinity besmirched. Weeks passed by in a drowsy blur in the Flynn Garden, Necrom's most established corner club. Not interring her in the ancestral tomb? Asked Vandas Ramoran, his fellow general, as Relvi was drowning his sorrows. Stern, yet caring in his comrades' trying times, Ramoran made sure not to appear brash when presenting the inevitable question. We're binding her to our ghost fence, Rallis replied. Everyone around the general heard the same reply, and every evening when Rallis would return home, he crept down the stairs to his basement, past sleeping Mayra. The lonely candles, once lit, flaunted a chilling display of Brelina's preserved body, hidden under layers of silk. Rallis caressed her marble cheek in an equally ghostly manner. One day, we will be reunited, my love. I will make sure of that. It's been little over a week since the signing of the sorcerer's dark contract. The shapely sum has been obtained and transferred to Magister Allah's coffers, the remote ritual site prepared, the necessary ingredients procured by Mayra Obrelaw, with the help of Allah's servants ready. The only thing that remained was Brelina's collection of personal effects necessary to complete the ritual. Rallis arrived to the ritual site at the break of dawn. His scarred face, a map of pain and sorrow, was now carelessly adorned by greying stubble. He handed a bag of Brelina's most prized possessions to the slender wizard, among them a dull ebony dagger with a crimson grip. "Where's this from?" the mage inquired, peering at the weapon with concerning attention. He squinted, as if dearly familiar with the now useless trinket. It seemed haunting, unlike any other artifact that's passed through the sorcerer's soft, almost feminine hands, echoing with a song. "The dagger. The mistress has never talked about it," Mayra replied. "For good reason," Soris said, tossing the dagger aside as if it was a thing fouler than himself. "Arrange the necessary items." Brelina's rotting carcass was the centerpiece of the ritual dais, evoking visible disgust from the necromancer. Despite his sour reputation as a death mage, Magus de Soris never stooped so low as to work with filth of such caliber, instead preferring the freshly slain, the ancient bones, and the spectral minions, a preference he dearly wished was shared by his lessers. The binding ritual took some 20 minutes of Daedric incantations, so piercing that the wizard's audience resorted to shielding their ears from the audible horror. The corpse was consumed by blinding azure flame. The general, stricken with ire at the apparent betrayal, attempted to advance towards the sorcerer despite his clear combat disadvantage. Yet before he could enact his judgment, a soft, melodic voice called to him from the ritual circle. "Rallis? Brelina." The shining apparition assumed its feminine form, bones concluding their dance in sound structure of her skeleton, cloaked by muscle and tissue, and then by radiant skin. Another of Soris's masterpieces, another insult to the Archaean cycle. The eerie song in the wizard's head reached a threatening crescendo as he sent a brief glance upon the returned maiden, traces of solemnity in his face. He hastily turned away and stepped aside. "Take her and leave," said the sorcerer, his demeanor encumbered by unusual aggression. "And remember my words." When Brelina's savior vanished, the couple threw themselves in each other's arms before the prodigal mistress collapsed gently, weak from her return. When her bones stopped glowing through her skin, she gazed upon her husband with unbridled joy. "My love, Brelina, we are together again." When the ritual residue no longer pervaded the morning air, Rallis lifted his wife and carried her to the boat, anchored off the coast of Tel Alar. The return to Necrom was no longer an option, for Brelina Relvi's miraculous return would mar their life beyond repair among the spiritually prudish Indoril. Rallis was ready to leave his previous life behind. Mayra was sent to the metropolis with news of her master's unfortunate demise on his travels, and with no blood relatives left to inherit his vast wealth, was generously rewarded with ownership of the Relvi estate. Having bequeathed a shapely fraction of his riches to his housemaid for her undying loyalty and aid in their dark quest, Rallis promptly bid her farewell, hoping for her to enjoy her newfound and well-deserved retirement. The couple settled far from their old home, in the sleepy Halalu town of St. Seren, shedding their old skin of Indoril nobility. For the townsfolk, they donned humble new names of Mevis and of Rusa Nelith. Things were finally looking up for the weathered general. Tender mornings in Brelina's ever-loving arms, quiet dinners under candlelight, silence between reunited lovers sacred as temple communion, soft, teasing laughter ringing through the corridors of the Nelith penthouse. After one of their regular evening walks in St. Seren's copious parks, the couple garnished their first Loridas with a modest feast of kwama egg quiche and spiced root cake. Brelina reached for her husband's hand and clasped it tight, her thumbs running a loving trail across its scarred surface. "Dear she began. "What happened to me?" Rallis wiped the crumbs off his chin, turning his infatuated gaze towards her. "You were murdered in our Necrom estate. You brought me back," Brelina replied, plaintive. "You went against everything your house held sacred. For me. I simply couldn't bear to go on without you, my love." Rallis paused. "The honor of an Indoril is simply not important when it comes to matters of true love to me," he continued. It felt oddly out of character for him, but he dismissed that feeling with relative ease whenever Brelina was in sight. Stranger things have happened to his mind since the tragedy, he thought, and this was nowhere near. "You..." Brelina swallowed. "You should not have done that. The risks you took." "Nothing," Rallis interrupted. "Nothing is more important to me than you, Brelina. Indoril be damned. No wealth could heal my wounds. My greatest treasure had been taken from me, and I am less of a mer without it, whether you like it or not." "Rallis," Brelina glanced at him with concern before turning away. "Perhaps you should have let me go." "Not a chance in oblivion. Ever so stubborn." "Always, my sweet." The maiden sighed. "I just don't feel like myself. And sometimes you don't seem like yourself either. Who are we now? Brelina? Avrusa Nelith? I feel like a different person altogether, my love. Beyond my new name, beyond my new home. I am not myself. It will pass, my Almalexia. We are together now. Stop it, you. I'm glad we are. I can't stop the feeling." "Damn it, woman!" Rallis stormed out of the dining hall. "Whatever I did for us!" As he retreated downstairs to ponder in the garden, Brelina looked at her reflection dancing in the cup of canis root tea. "Maybe," she whispered, "maybe you did it for yourself." The lovers were quick to reconcile as they were to ignite their arguments. The uneasy feeling of new skin, both literally and figuratively, bothered them nonetheless, but the couple opted not to address it any further out of fear of subjecting their relationship to peril. Days went on as usual, full of love and laughter, and sleepy kisses under the moonlight, distorted through their bedroom window. For the first time in a long while, Rallis was drifting asleep without jealousy he used to harbour towards Massa and Secunda's love. For the first time in a long while, it was a double date. "Honey?" Brelina's silky voice summoned Rallis from his restful sleep the following morning. "Yes, my dear love." "I'm pregnant." "Ayam's mercy. It's a boy." Relvi jumped out of the blanket in youthful excitement that no mer close to him had ever witnessed. His entire day was spent chewing over his son's name, ideas for his room, desire for a handcrafted cradle. "We should name him Soris." Brelina gave her husband a puzzled look. "Huh? Why?" After the sorcerer that..." "Forget about it." The mistress' tone was suddenly encased in an ice of contempt. Months passed, and double dates with the twin moons no longer possessed the same romantic touch. Brelina started having vivid dreams that eventually drew feverish sentences in her breath. Once adorable sleepy ramblings turned to incantations, of something benign upon examination, yet disturbing nonetheless. Dreams that turned into nightmares. Incantations turned into what resembled blood curses. Whispers in a voice that was no longer Brelina's, but to Rallis' dulled mind alluring all the same. Until one morning the mistress shook him out of his slumber, cold sweat raining on him from her wrinkled forehead. "I know his name." "Darling, what is this about?" "I saw him in my dream. My son." "You mean our son?" "He came to me from under a fiery river, naked, covered in blood. old, almost ancient, towering over me like a vessel of discord, flames raging in his hair and black gems for eyes. Gods, are you all right? It had 3 of them. It spoke to me. The mistress' voice cast off its layer of almost prophetic doom and turned into anger and fear. It told me its name. What is it? Rancitamos. The general was truly not himself either, after all. Despite the grimness of his wife's dream, it seemed as if he could not stop looking at her with an all-consuming love and devotion, and languished when they were apart. Brelina would withdraw from her husband, taking longer walks than usual, mulling over her second life. A life through another person's eyes. The nightmare brought about by her unborn son was the last she would see, as she lost her ability to sleep completely, staring at the ceiling with emptied eyes. Almost staring into it, as if the creature was just beyond, waiting for her to doze off. One sleepless morning, the mistress left St. Seren on important family business that was in need of dealing with in light of her resurrection, and rode away, taking nothing with her but a spellbook purchased from the local mages' guild, a black hooded cloak, and a dark child in her womb. When she arrived at her destination, the city of the dead, she snuck through the dusky streets of the metropolis back to the Relvi estate, which was now known as the Oberlaw estate. Her face hidden from the drowsy onlookers tumbling out of the Flynn garden, too drunk to understand what's happening. Brelina crept into the backyard of their former mansion and slid down into the basement from an outdoor hatch. Mayra, while ever loyal to her former master in spite of his total madness, was nevertheless superstitious, being aware of the dark secret in the mansion's undercroft. Thus, the door upstairs was sealed, much to the intruder's advantage. Brelina sifted through the dusty clutter before she found her bag of belongings used in the resurrection ritual. Inside was the ebony dagger with the crimson grip. Captivated by her main course, the mistress hastily cast the rest of the items aside before attempting her shadowy escape, the noise alerting the estate's new owner. Her chagrin unbridled, Brelina tumbled out of the basement, Mayra giving chase to the cloaked figure. When the latter slithered out of sight, she stopped, panting her lungs out in what felt like a fiery tornado gushing through her throat. The sensation receded when Mayra noticed her intruder's lost dagger resting in the grass, the very same weapon that instilled unnatural lull into the sorcerer that wielded miracles in front of her. She picked it up and felt a muffled rustle inside the seemingly hollow grip. Mayra gave it a slight thump, revealing a crumpled note within. Rallis was absolutely beside himself at his wife's sudden and prolonged disappearance. Word spread of Mevis Nelith and his apparent anger issues, stirring up savage gossip among the St. Seren townsfolk. When Mistress Avrusa returned home, her husband's fiery mien was transformed completely, once again slipping into the image of a loving, caring Mer, much to the twisted entertainment of the town's secret spectators. More months passed, and Brelina's trip remained an untouched topic, adding another to the 300 of mammoths in the room. The maiden was sleepless as ever, doubly bothered by her loss of the Necrom prize and the birth of her son. She would stare out of the window, seemingly at the parks of the town, but in reality at everything and nothing in sight. Her breath delayed. She glanced at Rallis with a hollow look, rejecting any bids for casual conversation, and instead interrogating her husband whenever he spoke. To Brelina, her husband ceased to be, and instead she felt chained, forced to perform ego-stroking tricks to an audience of one. "In your quest to bring me back," she spoke, devoid of any emotion, her once dazzling figure sunken wherever possible. "Did you ever consider if I wanted it?" The questions continued. Why do I feel the icy chill of the grave and yet draw breath? I do not feel it in my lungs. All they do is simply what they were made to do. I want an escape from this prison of flesh. Why are you denying me that escape? None of this is love. There is no love in what you did to me. Why? I do not feel your touch anymore. Must I suffer so, in the name of love that is no longer a mutual feeling? Her last question was uttered in a burp of rot, as the pitiable, maculent husk of what once was Avrusa Nelith, who once was Brelina Relvi, lay on Rallis's chest. How long? Until I am released from here. The baby boy was dreaming of more pleasant things in his handcrafted cradle. The next morning, the infatuated general was caressing a translucent bag of viscera, likening which to Brelina's beauty would have been deemed an insult even to his enchanted self. He held it tight, smiling, marble eyes gazing at the ceiling. With his other hand he was fidgeting with her wedding dowry, the amulet that has never left his neck since. Rallis blinked, sighing sweetly. Good morning, my love.